beard.
Welcome to Kettlebell Corner, where strength meets theory. We take you on a deep dive into all things kettlebells. Yes, that's us. Episode number 50. We've really got this down now, Roger.
Wait, that was the intro to episode 50? No,
Hey, put them on their toes. Okay. All right. Ready?
Oh, no, I was joking. I don't care. We don't need to do it.
Oh, okay, good. All right. Then let's get into it. This episode, first of all, if you've been listening for all 50 episodes, thank you. And if you haven't, well, clearly you're starting today and you're working your way backwards.
You've missed
today
nothing.
I want to talk about what's that, Roger?
You've missed nothing.
You've missed everything. Everything. One of the things that first I want to share this little story that came up with one of my clients a couple weeks ago, and we're going to use it as a basis to kind of talk about a couple of things and not really make it a shameless advertisement for the Bells app, which is available on the Apple App Store, download for free. But I zoomed in with this client, FaceTime, whatever it was, and he has a somewhat stressful job, pretty intellectual, uses a lot of brain power. And this particular day, he was over it, over everything. And it's one of those days where when you unload all of your stress on your coach at the beginning of your session, which if you work with the trainer, that tends to happen. If you're a trainer, you know it happens. I was like, I was fully prepared for you to not even show up today. This was one of those days where could have been an easy cop-out. And where he was at in his development, we were getting pretty specific on snatch details and the certain elements of the snatch, particularly, the arm to body connection and taming the arc on the way back down. However, I knew this was not going to be a viable option for him, just because getting somebody to think when they already have expressed their complete exhaustion of the mind and at a heightened stress level, I decided let's take the cognitive load out of it. And I happen to have a workout. Well, I happen to have hundreds of workouts in the Bells app that was appropriate, that basically moved through a bunch of different skills that he already knows and is at least proficient at without a lot of thinking required, without any thinking required. A little bit of coaching here and there, but it was mainly like, hey, let's just stay on track and we'll get through this. And we kept going. And ultimately, you know how the story goes, Roger. I didn't want to do this. I did it. I feel great. You're a god, and I accept it. I accept it. You know the feeling, Roger. Anyways, I believe that is like a cognitive offload, right, Roger? Is that what we're talking about here with this sort of move?
I think it's some of it. I mean, you can go a lot of different directions about why this is helpful, and maybe it is to listeners to think about, what are the different things that happen there and why are they useful? Why do you care? Because at the end of the day, if it doesn't matter to you, if you're not a coach, then, why would you care? And if you're a coach, you probably know this stuff anyway. So I do think that's one of the things that you did. And this is the benefit of having a program, or specifically having someone do a program for you, is you can take all of the thinking away from it. You can take the thinking out of it. It saves energy. People don't like to think when they're tired. So it's really easy to just go into a workout when you have, something already done, and it's binary. You execute or you don't execute. And that is really, really helpful, because if you go in and you start thinking about, what is it that I want to do, which is probably the way most, coaches, most exercise professionals work out. Sure, they're probably following some loose program, but there's there's usually a lot of thinking that goes into designing something, a session for the day. So it's already done. You don't have to think about it. But what I would also want to think about is your client doesn't do any of that anyway. So at least not in terms of programming and coming up with the program. So why was this a better option? And there are some other things to think about. And I think one direction I want to go, and I want your thoughts because you were there, I was not, but a couple of things stand out. But the thing that probably stands out the most is if you are pursuing a particular task like the snatch, if you have an objective, And it requires you to be aware when you're learning what happens to your brain when you're trying to meet said objective. And I think the short answer is a lot of exhaustion. You know, you've got a snatch, you're working on a snatch, and all of a sudden you don't feel up to it. You could keep trying, but then how do you feel? Do you succeed? Probably not. Is it discouraging? Probably. Is it frustrating? Definitely. So tell me a little bit about that process. Did you even discuss with your client the option of continuing to work the snatch?
I did not. There was no options given. I basically said to him, listen, in these sort of situations, I find it best to get out of your head. And just like you said, if you have to think about something, like if you have to think about it and put in that effort, what is it, like our brains use like 80% of our caloric intake or something weird like that, where they're like, oh, your brains need all this stuff. And here I'm getting a guy after work, and I already explained it's a pretty stressful, thought-provoking job, and to come at it without the approach of, let me say, to come at it with the approach of, would you like to do this now? Would you still like to do this? Most people, in my experience, will oblige. They'll be like, yeah, let's just do it if that's what's on the plan. However, having coached for, 13 years or whatever it is, 10 years in kettlebells, you have to sometimes make decisions for people because like their central governor might be off. You know what I mean? It might just be like, oh yeah, if this is what I got to do, this is what I'm going to do. And there's plenty of times where, okay, maybe you do proceed that way. However, with something pretty technical like that, where you have to connect a bunch of different parts to the body, and also knowing his body. He also is a former bass player as myself. And Roger, you know how my left shoulder liked to be back in the day. He's got a similar thing going on, and it's like, is this going to be a problem? Now, did he snatch in this? Yeah, we actually snatched in it, of course. However, it wasn't a rep number that was going to be super extensive and taxing on what he could pull off. In fact, this particular workout, and I'll link it in the show. So if you don't have the Bells app and you click that link, you will now have the Bells app. What? It was called The Wolf. And I don't know why I called it that, but I made him howl at the end. You know what I'm saying? Like, we can't complete this until you howl. But it's only 3 reps.
I would have fired you.
But it's only like 3 reps on each side of whatever it was, you know what I mean? But it just moves sort of with a good pacing to it, you know what I mean?
Sure.
And in the end, it was 39 minutes of work. It was nothing crazy. Everything sort of built up on each other. There was lots of swings in between the different things. And swings is basically, a pretty good starting point for all of the kettlebell skills. So it's something that was in his bag without really thinking. Obviously, I know this because I've seen him. So if you're somebody evaluating yourself, let's say you're that guy in this position, Roger, what are some things that you're going to consider for evaluation to determine whether it's put it on automatic, I'm just going to press play on this, or I'm going to do the prescribed program, or I'm not going to do a workout at all? What kind of things do you think?
I don't want to talk about that yet.
Okay.
I want to.
Do you need a couple more drinks? What do we got to do?
I do want to talk about that because it's important. And I think that, you're asking me about some criteria to evaluate somebody. How might I make this decision? And then we should probably talk about, the structure of the workout itself and why going probably lower load, lower volume was a good idea. But I want to call some things out. One thing that you did was you changed the relationships, the customary relationships. So not just you changed his relationship to you. Usually you are the one who's making the calls, and you offloaded that. You allowed, tech support, like, hey, I'm going to outsource. I'm going to let this thing tell you what to do. And when you allowed that to happen, you allowed your client to have a different relationship with you. You became a friend or a confidant, someone who was able to listen or dispense advice. And that's all deep and meaningful and all that crap.
I love that vision board shit.
I know you do. But you allowed that relationship to change, and you also allowed the relationship between him and the work he was doing to change. You took that pressure off, and you allowed him to make progress without focusing on the thing. So one of the most important things you did was you changed the relationship of him to the exercise. And this is a really important skill if you're somebody who's working out, and maybe it seems commonsensical, maybe it doesn't, but it's great to have a plan. It's great to have a program. It's great to execute. It's great to, it is a great feeling when you don't want to do something and you look at the page and like, I'm going to get this done anyway. It's a good feeling, but it's not always the right thing to do. So you changed the paradigm. You changed the relationship of your client to exercise, of your client to you, of your client to snatching, of your client to himself. And by shifting those paradigms, you allowed things to function in a different way, and you took some pressure off. And sometimes exactly what you need to do is change the relationship that you have to exercise, and it frees things up. Sometimes it's more stressful. In this case, it was less stressful. So I just wanted to make that explicit before we moved on, because I think it's an important lesson for people to learn.
Excellent. And for the record, I did make the workout, people. So it wasn't just some random thing I pulled off ChatGPT. And you shouldn't feel bad, if you do that, but you should know that there is a method.
And it's not, it's not about the workout or not. It really is just you changed your role as the coach. And rather than the guy saying, hey, let's do this now and let's over cue, or not over cue, but let's be really form intensive and picky and learn. You just, hey, let's just do what the thing says. Yeah. And let's do easy things that you know how to do. It is also worth noting some basic stages of motor learning. When we begin a new skill, or when we're learning a new skill, we are in what's known as the cognitive phase. Everything's really deliberate and difficult, and it burns a lot of calories, and it's really hard. You have to think about everything you do. So nothing is automatic yet. Then you move from there to the associative phase, and you're starting to make some connections, and you have some previous experience. You're not an expert, but you're far from automatic still. But you're getting there. This is where you really feel like you're starting to practice. You're not, you're not in that awkward, everything seems wrong phase. You're starting to make progress. And then you get finally the autonomic phase where this skill, whatever it happens to be, is just kind of drilled in. If you ask me to, hey, do a snatch, I go, okay. Maybe I'll want to warm up, but that has nothing to do with the learning or the cognitive part. It has everything to do with whether or not my tissues are ready to perform the task I know so well. So as you go through these phases of motor learning, you can understand that, especially from a coach's perspective, that learning a new thing is very neurologically intensive. It's very physiologically intensive. It literally burns more calories. So, your first, a lot of times when I start with a new client and we have a first session, I feel like, I don't feel like I did anything. Like, okay, well, let's see how you feel tomorrow. Like, oh my God, I slept so good and I'm sore. It's your brain figuring out new things. So I wanted to call that out too. So you were talking about diagnostics, more or less. If I'm not mistaken, you asked me what am I looking at if I'm going to make that call?
Yeah. Maybe I listed most of the things you would look at, but what are some of the things you would look at to make that call for your clients? And then more so, I think for everybody listening, if you're not a coach, what are some of the things you would look at in yourself that would signal to you where you need to do that offload, perhaps to whatever Bell's workout you deem necessary, or whatever your go-to is?
I work a little differently. And like, I'm not joking when I say this. I'm very empathetic as a coach, but I'm less sympathetic as a coach than you are. I don't really see much value in sympathy.
You're not calling me a puss, are you?
Maybe a little bit I am. No, it's, look, we've got different styles of relating, and I want my clients to tell me everything that's going on. I want them to offload. I want to hear about their stress. But one of the first things I do is I say, okay, cool. Let's keep going. We've got a job to do. Let's see what we can do. There are times if like they're absolutely exhausted and they haven't slept, and they visibly look, kind of haggard and worn. You can tell, how bright are people's eyes? What is their complexion like? Is their posture different than it normally is? I've got a couple clients who, if they don't insult me a little bit in the first 5 minutes, then I'm like, okay, what's wrong?
Yeah, so, something's off.
Yeah, exactly. So you have those patterns, but generally when people will come in, like, all right, cool, let's get some work done. And I fall back on what they know. I'll stick with a warm up. And I want them to feel that familiarity. I don't want them to feel like I have shut them down, but I also don't want to feed into the negativity. And I want to see, is it still there? Does it persist? Did they just need a minute or two to word vomit, and now they're going to continue and they're going to work? Or is this still a thing and we need to talk about it? And I know, because, once I make that little transition, they do a little bit of the warm up. If they come back to it, like, okay, they're not done yet, and that's fine. Mm-hmm. So I want to give them the opportunity to ignore it and not make it bigger than it is. But if they keep coming after it, then it's like, okay, this is a thing. But I'm going to have them do a normal thing, and then I'm going to check. It's binary. I try to reduce training decisions to something binary always, because training is a very complex thing. So think about the most important thing that you can do and make it a binary decision, and ask your clients a binary question. Do you have more energy or less than when you walked in? And if it's less, then that's a big warning sign. Actually, I'm starting to feel a little better. Okay, cool. Then we might move into the session and keep going. So, it's a little bit of a check, but again, this is something that, I've only really learned how to do as I've gotten more mature as a trainer. Reduce the variables. And again, if you can create, a scenario where things are yes or no, then I think you're winning. It's not that you're ignoring the rest of it. But you need to do a bit of a triage first and say, okay, this is the most important thing right now. This is the most important variable. And how can I ask a question about this variable where I can get a yes or a no answer? So, and that's what I continue to do. So I'm checking energy. I'm just watching. I'm watching how people respond. You will often know, I've said this in the past, if you pick up a kettlebell, the bell you usually use and it feels heavy, probably not going to be your best day. Might be,
right,
but there's a good chance that it's not. I was doing some presses today. Did not have a lot of energy. I've been up since about 1 a.m. and
party animal. Jeez.
Yeah, well, that's after going to bed at 9.
Loser.
I didn't exactly. That's probably close to the truth. But I didn't have a lot of energy, and I had a little bit of time at the gym before a client, and I was alternating. I did a pull-up, I did a press, I did a pull-up, I did a press, and I rested. I grabbed the 40, and the 40 felt light. So by the time I was done, I was, each one, it was 2 reps, and I'm like, oh, okay, this is good. So, sometimes just picking up the bell is a pretty big indicator, but you need to read the signs, and that's really what I do, is try something and then see what you get. And then you'll know, are things improving, are things degrading, or are they just kind of the same? And if they're the same, then cool. We don't do a crazy amount of load. We don't do a crazy amount of volume. I just decrease the work. And then we do end up talking through a lot of the session and seeing if we can, if I can get my client to kind of offload and maybe, have them even come up with some solutions to their own problems by the end. And that's really just about asking questions.
Sounds like magic, if you ask me.
Well,
sounds like some voodoo magic you're using there, Roger.
you shouldn't be taking advice from me about anything except for exercise. So
make that a disclaimer here. Okay.
if you ask
this is not investment advice. So
if you ask the right questions, people usually solve their own problems.
Yeah, and a lot of times, and if you're somebody, obviously, if you're listening to this, you're probably somebody who works out, probably with kettlebells. You'll know that you a lot of times will feel better once you just start moving and you get things going. And one of the things that kind of comes up, especially if you have the early morning client or you're an early morning person who works out, you get like, oh, I feel stiff and this and that. And so from this point, that's another indicator of like, okay, they either don't want to do this or, they're just stiff and are waking up. So you just extend the warm up and try to hit a bunch of different movement patterns. This is what I typically do. Hit a bunch of different movement patterns or even skills like, all right, let's do some squats and some push-ups. All right, how's that feel? Everything's firing back up. All right, how about we do a few swings and then, some rows and stuff like that. All right, we're working. All right, and then, if you're stiff in that, and the objective of the session is a snatch, maybe I'll have you do a squat, a press, and a push press and just sort of work a vertical trajectory. And then lo and behold, if it's an hour session, now we've warmed up for 20 minutes. You're feeling good. I can see that you're sweating. Now we're going to get into the snatch work that was planned, and ultimately that can get you into it. And one of the things that I've noticed about myself, Roger, and this kind of works out sort of well for me right now in the particular way that I'm training, if I'm doing more of the sport pentathlon stuff, is I'll just grab a light bell and I'll just do the first set of cleans. And I'll do it for a couple minutes and I'll give myself a couple minutes and then I'll do the next clean and press. I'll do it for a couple minutes. And by no means am I trying to hit a certain rep number or using the weight that I think is my capability at the time, but it's just, how am I feeling? All right, now I'm into it. Now I'll roll back through after I get through those exercises and I'll do it with a serious load and a little bit more time and intent if the nature provides for it, I also pressed workout today, Roger. So there.
All right.
I even did old school hard style, the way I was born without a tail.
Anyway.
Yeah. So, all right.
One of the things that, I try not to listen directly to you and I think about other important things.
Listen at me.
So something that came to mind as I was listening to you was the idea that you need to treat your life stress as a variable to manipulate and as a stimulus to recover from. When we look at X's and O's and, we're like making the plays, we're figuring out the programs, or we're doing the reps and the sets and all that. There are some people who will recommend, push through no matter what. And that's true sometimes, but I really think that's more social media persona than it is actual, like the whole David Goggins kind of mentality, which is helpful sometimes. But most of the time for most people, it is not. And you need to consider the stress that you're under as something that's going to impact you physiologically. Stress is a physical thing. It's a signal that your brain and your body get. They're inextricably linked. So you can't just look at stress as, I'm feeling the weight of these big ideas. Stress is something that changes your physiology. It changes how you move and how long it will take to recover. So you can't ignore that. I've been working with some younger people lately. It's summer, so people's kids are home from college, and a couple things I'm really stricken by is how a lot of these kids really want to be a student. They really want to learn this stuff, and they're coming with some pretty interesting ideas. It's almost like working with a brand new trainer. But one thing that they're really focused on is the best way. The idea of human optimization.
Optimization. I love it, bro. Everything's optimized.
And it's cool to know the best way to do something, but as I've said before, the best way is always going to be context dependent. And that's really what we're talking about here. So, you can go in something I just talked about today was the idea of, the high intensity interval training. Is it good for cardio? Yeah, it's great for your cardio. It's got, some good studies behind it and says that good stuff happens. But is it right for everybody? As a coach who works with regular folks, it's right for very few people. It just is. They can't handle, they, at least not right away, they can't handle the wear and tear of, doing a sprint, or they can't handle the recovery from, going all out and really, really pushing. And I'm not talking about, oh, I did a HIIT class, let's Tabata everybody. And, everyone's in a circle and they're whooping and, they're using their pink weights and, they're working at about 20% of capacity. That's not what I'm talking about. These things are very effective, but it's not often practical. And that's really one of the things we need to consider is you have to manage your life stress as any other variable and anything to recover from. So intensity, load, repetitions, tempo, this is another thing that you can't forget.
True that. It all kind of is like a sandwich where you want to put everything on that bread. And if you take too big of a bite, you might poop your pants. All right. Perfect analogy. All right. So long story short,
yes.
Long story short, if you need to offload some stuff, it's okay to keep it super simple. Use something predefined, or, take a break. You know what I mean? And like Roger said, it's all context dependent. If we were there for you every time, we could put you in the right place and do the right things, but we're not going to be there for you every time, Roger. That's why we created this app, the Bells app. So for under $10, most of the time you can get a handful of workouts. You could do a whole month for that price, of workouts that'll offload some of the decisions for you, provided you have spent the time to develop the skills that are proficient to do what's there. You know what I mean? Obviously, don't get out of your depths. If you don't know how to do a double bell jerk, and that's on something that somebody sent you, or that's what you're offloading it to, that's obviously not for you, because it takes a lot of brain and it takes a lot of stress to learn something new like that. Keep it simple, stupid, right? Can you say that?
Hey, you just said it. So,
okay. It's been said.
I'll go with yes.
All right. Anything else, Roger?
Just one thing that I'll throw out, and that this seemed to be the format of the workout, and some of the virtues of why this one seemed good is it seemed very low volume. It seemed like there was a lot of recovery, and it allowed a focus on technique. It didn't really turn up the suck factor. It wasn't an EMOM. It wasn't super high load or high intensity. That's important when you want to move. When you want to move and you want to make progress, but you don't want to overtax yourself. There are times when I'll just do some mobility work. I will realize like today is just it's not a day to really push myself, but I want to get better. So today is not the day where I can introduce enough stimulus to my body and brain to get stronger, but I can use the time, because I have the time and it'll make me feel better and productive. Can use that time to mobilize myself or to work on technique. I can do something that's very, very low load. Sometimes I will sit down in my gym and I will come up with exercises, or I will program. I will do something that makes me better, the future me better. And sometimes, you do that, and that's also the right call.
All right. I like it. Now we got to do an episode where we make people feel like they got to push extremely hard, Roger. Push past that. I don't want to do it. And, don't rely on such a sympathetic a-hole coach like me. You know what I mean? Is that what you said? I'm too sympathetic? My next client's going to pay.
I'm not.
I hang out with you.
It comes down to this. Like, I understand you feel bad, but I don't care.
Yeah, that's true. That's Roger in a nutshell. All right, everybody. Thank you for listening. Thank you for rolling with us for 50 episodes. We enjoy putting these out. And if you have any questions about this or any other thing kettlebell related, please put them in the comments. And, like we said, you can always send us a video. We'll break it down right here And you can do that through Instagram, The Iron Revival, or theironrevival@gmail.com. We'll get you straight up there, and download the Bells app. I don't got to say it again. Anything else?
No.
Stay strong, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.